Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Last time we dealt with bad moods, when we're bad moods, and how to protect others from our bad moods or protecting us from our own bad moods. This is Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections, and your host for this episode of the Networking RX podcast. Today we're going to jump back into a discussion about moods, not necessarily your bad moods and how to protect, shield other people from it, shield yourself from that bad behavior because it really ends up hurting you or hurting me when it's my bad mood. But we're going to talk about other people's moods, other people's behavior, because other people's behavior tends to trip us up from time to time. We don't live in a vacuum. Other people interact with us, and what they're doing tends to trigger us. And people in our lives, if they have bad days, it can kind of spill over into us. But before we get started, I want to remind you that we're looking to add quality people to our stable of franchisees. This is a unique franchise opportunity within AmSpirit Business Connections. It's geared for aspiring entrepreneurs or professionals to add on to what they're already doing. Again, all of our franchisees, all the AmSpirit Business Connections franchisees do something else. For a couple hours in the morning, a few mornings a week, our franchisees operate the AmSpirit Business Connections program. The rest of the week, they're accountants, attorneys, financial advisors, people focused on real estate, consultants, coaches of various kinds. So it runs the gamut. If you're interested or you know someone who might be interested, contact me. There's an email in the show notes, or you can use the one that we provide at the very, very end of the program. Okay, back to talking about moods and other people's behavior. I don't subscribe to many magazines. I get a few, but one that I have consistently subscribed to, and I don't know how I ended up subscribing to it. I think my kids were selling magazines at school, and it was like, all right, they needed to sell so many, and Grandma gets this one, and Grandpa gets this one, and we still need 2 or 3 more. And I settled on this particular magazine, and I've really enjoyed it, and they're long since out of high school, long since beyond those magazine selling days, and I've continued that subscription. And the subscription is to Psychology Today. What I enjoy about it is psychology is really the study of individuals and individuals' relationships with other people. And there are a lot of articles, I have to admit, in the magazine that I blow through or don't read at all. People talking about recovering from abuse and alcohol and chemical dependencies and things like that. And I don't find those interesting because I don't find those relevant to what I deal with day to day. I'm not saying those problems aren't important. They certainly are important. But at any rate, I do focus on the articles that have to do with relationships. And I'm fond of saying that there really is no difference between personal relationships and professional relationships as far as our brain can take in the information. We have one brain. It sees interactions much the same, and it doesn't necessarily know that there are dollars or pesos or euros attached to those relationships. They just see relationships. The brain just sees relationships. And so betrayal kind of seems the same way. Liking and trusting people seems the same way, whether it's a personal relationship or a professional relationship. The outcome is just different. That's all. So I enjoy reading the articles on relationships, and I stumbled across one. This was in the July-August issue of 2019, for those who might be listening to this far into the future. 2019 July-August issue of Psychology Today. And there was an article that talked about volatile people and dealing with volatile people. And I'm not talking about the person who, is going to race back to his work and shoot the place up. I'm not making light of that at all, but those instances are few and far between, and God willing, none of us has to deal with any of that. But we all have to deal with people who are volatile, people who are kind of keep us walking on eggshells from time to time, and it's I guess when I say volatile people from time to time, I think about that, and it's like, well, you're either not volatile or you're volatile, and it's kind of like trust and reliability. Um, you're reliable 100% of the time, or you're not reliable. And if you're a volatile person, there might be a period where you're not behaving in a volatile fashion, but you're still volatile. You just haven't been set off. And we tend to deal with these sorts of people from time to time, and we can't always pick and choose who's in our life. We can certainly pick and choose who's in our network, but we're still going to be interacting with people, and a lot of times you just don't have a choice. I guess you can move from where, if you've got a neighbor, but you might have a coworker. There might be people that you're interacting with, vendors. In the short term, we can certainly kind of control these things, but even if, to the extent we can control these things, these people are going to resurface in our lives. It reminds me of a book that one of John Maxwell's books I read years ago. He keeps coming out with books, and I continue to try and keep up with them. But I remember reading it years ago, and it talked about a church pastor who was dealing with a board at a particular church that he was involved with, and there was one particular person on the board who was especially cantankerous, and having to deal with that person. And this particular pastor got a new assignment, got a new opportunity, clear across country, figuring, hey, I've got a fresh start. And when he got to the new church that he would be working at, sure enough, there's somebody on the board who was a different name, different personality, different story, but the same sort of cantankerous behavior. So my point is that these people are going to come and go from our life, and there's really not a whole lot we can do about that. We need to deal with it. You can't really just walk away from it. So I thought this article was especially interesting because it really touched on this, and it was by Dr. Abigail Brenner. And it was interesting because there's some insight in there I think we can all take advantage of. Obviously I read it. It caught my attention. So I kind of want to quickly review the article. Subscribe to Psychology Today, or pull it off the shelf and read it. There are lots of great articles in there, and it touches on things that do relate to professional relationships, business networking, dealing with coworkers, leadership, things like that. And so it's good to read from time to time. I think it comes out with 6 issues a year, so it's pretty easy to keep up with. In this short inset piece, she has 7 points for us, and I'm going to touch on all 7 real quickly. I'm not going to read it to you because I can't read like that. But the first point she makes is, don't try to fix the person. The person is the person. And if you try and fix the person and you try and capitulate to the person, it really only tends to make it worse. Because if you're trying to fix them and trying to capitulate, you're conditioning them that their volatile behavior gets them something. I was listening to a podcast several weeks ago. If you remember, on our podcast back in October, I did an interview with Tim Schur, and Tim has his own podcast, which I have been listening to pretty much starting this past summer and continuing on. A lot of insightful stuff, and the name of the podcast is How to Be Mesmerizing with Tim Schur. But anyhow, there was one particular podcast episode where he talked about anger, and he kind of distilled anger down to something that's very primal, something that we'll do when everything else fails, and it's our way of taking control. So to a degree, volatile people are becoming volatile because they're just trying to take control. And volatility is very closely aligned to anger. They're just trying to take control, and to the extent we buy into it or try and change them, we're just conditioning them that it's okay. The second point she makes is be present, be direct. You just can't walk away from the situation necessarily, but you try to deal with the situation and just be direct with what you're willing to do, why you're willing to do it. Again, there's no need to capitulate. You need to be fair. And volatile people will tend to make threats. They'll tend to do whatever they need to try and use their volatility to get their way. You just need to kind of be firm. firm to the point where when it gets to a point where it's going to be, I don't mean physically combative, but you just, tempers are flaring on your side, then you just kind of need to walk away, but you just need to state your position and say, this is how it is going to be, just because, and give them the reason why. In dealing with these people, the third point is encourage them to express themselves, allow them the opportunity, certainly be direct with them, but then allow them the opportunity to share what it is that they're trying to say. You seem angry about this. Can you please explain to me why you're angry? Can you please explain to me why this has got you so upset? And just listen. Don't interrupt. Just listen and let them talk. And sometimes that venting will just allow them to cool down. That'll allow them. And I've been at that point where you just got to get to a point you realize, geez, I'm just being silly. But you allow them to talk and allow them to just express themselves and listen. The fourth thing is watch for triggers or off-limit topics. I think we all deal with people and we know that there are things that will set them off, whatever that might be. And it can be, it can be anything. It can be a discussion about college football. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and God help us all when the Buckeyes lose. And so there are certain things that set people off. There are certain topics that set people off. And it just, you have to kind of know, and it depends on the person. Sometimes it has to deal with money. A lot of times it has to deal with money, but there are certainly other things that kind of set them off. And there are people in my life that I really like that kind of have this, they have this, I hate to call them volatile people, but they have these episodes, and I realize that, and I just have to be careful in how I deal with them. The fifth thing, it's not about you, usually. It's what Dr. Brenner says. It's not about you, usually. And I think that's an important point. It could be about you, but usually it's not. It's usually people who are volatile, cantankerous. It's something beyond you, and you can't think, geez, it's always me. I always think it's comforting when I see volatile people or people who kind of get into issues with everyone. If I see they've got a past of getting into it with other people and then they're kind of coming at me the same way, I realize that it's not me. It's just how this person is. And I just happen to be their, using air quotes here, their flavor of the day. And so I can't really worry about me. I always want to be self-reflective, and I think you should be as well, that, hey, I can be improving and be better at this or that. But just because somebody has come at you and is angry and they're a volatile person doesn't mean that you need to do any sort of changing. And again, if I see they have a past of this sort of behavior and all of a sudden I am the target now, I realize that they'll move on to another target some point soon. The sixth point that Dr. Brenner makes is know your boundaries. A friend of mine has a saying, and his saying is simply, that's not a hill I'm willing to die on. And that's his way of saying, it's his way of kind of expressing his boundaries and knowing when, hey, you know what, that's something I'm going to take on, or that's something I'm not going to take on. And that, I guess, applies to lots of things in life. He uses it a lot with respect to talking about interactions with his wife and, okay, I'm just going to give in to this, or, you know what, I've got to take a stand on this. This is a hill I'm willing to die on. And I think that phraseology is useful in dealing with volatile people. There are things that you need to take a stand on, and then there are things that you just need to let go. And so you kind of need to know where those boundaries are. When's the walk away point? What are the issues that are just non-negotiable, and what are the ones that just like, it's not even worth it. Just let them go. The last point she makes is be prepared. If there are situations where you're going to have to be dealing with these people, this person, him or her, it could be either gender. You just need to be prepared. You just need to be ready for that. I sat on a board for a number of years with a group of people. It was a soccer board, and there was one particular person who was there was no pleasing them. There was just no pleasing them. And I just knew that I just had to be ready. And to know, you knew it was coming. You didn't know exactly how it was coming. You didn't know from which angle. But it took a lot of mental energy, but it was just something I knew I couldn't avoid them. I was on the board. I was committed to being on the board. Other people were committed to being on the board. We relied on each other, and we knew this behavior was going to rear itself meeting after meeting, and we would meet, sometimes we'd meet weekly, sometimes bi-weekly, sometimes monthly, but we knew that we were always going to have to face it. And so I would prepare myself and kind of go through mentally what I needed to deal with. I didn't want to, but I was kind of committed to it, and there was a reason they were tied into it as well. So anyhow, seven key points. Don't try and fix the person. Be direct and present. Allow them to express themselves. Encourage them to express themselves. Kind of avoid those topics that that set things off, the triggers. Remember, it's not about you. It's not about you. Usually not about you. Know your boundaries. Know what hill you're willing to die on and which ones you're not. And then the last thing is be prepared. But volatile people out there, as the John Maxwell story shows, is these people are going to be in your life. These people are out there. I don't want to say they're everywhere, but they're out there, and you're just going to have to deal with them. And as soon as one's out of your life, it just kind of opens the void for another one to come in. And so you need to take the time to prepare yourself. In closing, I usually do this at the beginning of the program. I failed to do it. I want to thank everyone for being on here. I want to thank everyone for the kind words. I don't get a lot of show notes or comments in the show section, but I got a lot of emails. I got a lot of people sharing this information. I got a lot of people referring this podcast on to others, both within AmSpirit Business Connections and outside of it. But I really appreciate that. Thank you very much for doing that. We're into the 130th some odd episodes at this point, and it's got a lot of staying power. People have sent me a lot of great material, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.